So I'd like to give a little perspective on wheat in Michigan. Just wheat in Michigan should be getting national attention at this stage. So back in the 60s, and this is also the answer to the question, why do we need a breeding program? I've been asking, why do we need you here? And so how many of you still grow Frankenmuth or Augusta? Thank you. Good. I mean, we should, right? We keep those varieties alive. But my point is, this increase in yield here, this is due to genetics, in part due to management. Nitrogen doesn't change much. Fungicides, chemistries are getting more and more expensive to develop. We're looking at 1% increase in yield every year. So what I'll show you later is that we're looking at increasing yield potential by 20 bushels just with genetics. So back in the 60s, we're down around 30 to 40 bushels here, and we had the highest non-irrigated yields in the country last year. Okay, Nevada, fine, 110 bushels, that's irrigated, right, on 8,000 acres. We're producing a lot of wheat in Michigan, and this yield potential is what separates us from other states in the region. Now, this is data from 2015 and 2014. You can see Missouri was king of acres, but even Missouri has seen a shift. These are in numbers of acres planted here. Excuse me, acres harvested. It's a little different from planted acres. But you can see Missouri is down. All states in the region, in the soft wheat region, are down, with the exception of Michigan. Okay, we're up by 5,000 acres. So a marginal increase in acres. Now this is where it gets interesting, is the total production. Now, North Carolina saw the biggest hit. They were down 32% in total bushels produced. We're up 11% in total production. Now, remember we don't have as many acres as these other states. We're still under 500,000 acres. We don't have 750,000 acres, but we're producing more wheat on fewer acres than any other state in the soft wheat region. Okay, so if you want to look at average yields in these states, we had the highest yield. This was the highest yield in the country, and we have the highest 3-year average of all the soft wheat producing states in the eastern region. Now, once we can take a further step back and look at the national stage here. We're number 13 in the country. Of course, we're never going to catch North Dakota and Kansas, right? I mean, they have millions. You know, they have 10 to 12 million acres of wheat planted. But you can see their yields don't even come close to ours. And we're just behind Oregon, and I think if we have a good year this year, we're going to beat Nebraska in total production. I think that's pretty outstanding, and should bring a lot of attention to the work that you are doing as wheat producers in Michigan. You guys are doing a good job, and it shows at the national level. So, but other states in the region have had very good yields. We've had record yields in all the plain states. In Texas and Oklahoma now are just finishing up harvest, and so they've had good years too. But I'm expecting a very good year on par with last year. This rain will really help out with that. Okay, so I'm going to move into our contribution to that. I mentioned the genetics is a huge part of yield potential. So we're making about 800 crosses per year, and we have a big crew, and we emasculate. We pull the anthers off of about thousands of individual plants every year and drop pollen in there and make those crosses. We plant those progenies in the field down at Mason, and we hammer those with scabs. So I'll talk a little bit about the traits that are under selection. Of course, yield potential is there. You know, that's offense. And we have to play defense too by working on scab resistance. That's a major trait. And then quality too. Wheat isn't worth much if you can't sell it. There's a lot of wheat in the world right now. Okay, South America had good production. They're in a drought right now, but so there's a lot of wheat in the world, and so having high quality wheat allows us to export that. So we can't forget about it. It's still something we focus on. So in testing, we start with about 800 crosses, and then we derive. So wheat is an inbred crop, and we have to derive inbreds from those, and so. Across the road, if we were over there right now, you would see 1,000 different potential varieties planted across the road. It's on 5 acres, it's on small scale yield plots, but we're testing 1,000 potential varieties every year. So it'll take us 3 days to combine that across the road at about a minute per plot. So it'll be some long days, but it pays off in the end. And I'll actually show some data that we have on some of our best lines that are coming through the program. So I mentioned scab as a major selection target, and if you can see, this is kind of scabby seed. That is not what we want. So from those segregating populations that we have, we apply about 30 pounds of scab inoculum per acre. So Matt Graham spends January through March infecting corn kernels and developing about 300 pounds of inoculum, deliberately spreading infected corn kernels out in the field to induce heavy disease pressure. And then we run these through a color sorter. It's very similar to what some of the flour mills have. It takes a digital image. We train the camera here what a scabby kernel looks like, a fusarium damaged kernel, and it will eject. It's pneumatic, runs off of an air compressor. And what we'll end up with is scabby seed versus clean seed. And we take all that clean seed, so that's applying pressure for scab resistance at that stage. And so we advance those in the greenhouse. So we're always looking for ways to increase the breeding cycle, make it go faster, right? It's a long-term process, and this inbreeding process takes a long time where you get an inbred into the field and you can yield test it. So we're working on that. We have an excellent greenhouse program where we can advance populations there and gain some time. And we move into yield trials. Okay. So here's the important slide here. This is where we can compare. And you guys have this table on your handout as well about the breeding program if you want to check out those numbers. This is a longer list of those lines, but you can see. So we have red wheat and white wheat in the program too. It's about 50-50 right now, and they're all competitive. So when we test, we're always trying to beat the best lines that are out there right now, or the most widely planted lines. We're always trying to improve things. Okay, so down at the bottom you can see Ambassador. So this is Ambassador that is just left to the world. We're not applying fungicide. This is Ambassador without leaves and low test weight from scab. Okay, and AC Mountain as well. So I saw a lot of acres of these on my drive in this morning too. You can see these from the road. And then if you're familiar with this line, it's not marketed anymore, but 25R39 had the highest, for red wheats, had the highest 4-year average for yield potential across the state. Now, the top of the list here is R29. So you can notice that AC Mountain and Ambassador, they're about 100 bushels per acre. Our best red wheat line, it's 123 bushels per acre. This is without intensive management. So we're seeing in our advanced lines a 20 to 23 bushel increase over the most competitive lines that are currently found in the state. And so these guys, we're getting a second year of data on these, and we're about 3 years away from having foundation seed ready for these lines. Now, I'm not saying that these lines will make it all the way. They do have some excellent properties. Like, for example, these two red wheat lines, they're full sibs. We don't know the pedigree of them. We inherited these lines from another program years ago, but they don't produce Don. I mean, Ambassador under heavy disease pressure, we can push Ambassador to something like 15 parts per million Don. And that's the important trait when we're working with scab. But these lines here, these will only hit 2 parts per million. So these lines, if you have them in the field, you're using fungicides and managing disease. These lines have highly reduced risk due to scab. Now, when we're talking about white wheat, I want to focus on these lines here. W298, we're looking at still a 16 bushel increase over an AC Mountain and Ambassador, and we have the yield potential, and we have the scab resistance along that. I don't have the Don data up here, but they're highly resistant to accumulation of mycotoxin in the grain. But feel free, does anyone have any questions about these lines at this point, or what does a breeding program even do, or so feel free to ask any questions at any time here. So I'm going to shift gears a little bit here and talk about management. So we're really here with our tools and technology to make wheat profitable for Michigan growers, to increase yields, increase profitability. And I've been talking about genetics. Okay, so we can get anywhere from 15 to 20 bushels on genetics, and that's a huge component of yield potential. Well, what about management? So I'm really interested in this because it relates to yield potential. And so because there's a lot of potential with this kind of information, my research group has taken on the question of what kind of yields can you achieve via management? Meaning if I apply intensive fungicide rates, high rates of fungicide to control all diseases, high levels of nitrogen, okay? We provide wheat with optimum growing conditions, give it the perfect growing environment, what kind of yield can we get? But then I added on top of that, the question is, okay, well, how much do we profit from that, right? So here's the total cost per acre. We're looking at bottom line is $67 per acre for all of these inputs that we use. So we applied some 28%. So I'll back up. So we fall apply some fertilizer. Lee, what's the fall rate of fertilizer we use? 90 pounds of N. Okay, so we got 90 pounds of urea out there. And then we come back in with streamer bars and we're applying 30 pounds. So it's a split N application, 2 applications. And our estimates are $13.20 per acre. Okay? So then we're coming in with this is a high-end fungicide product, Full Excel. It's a triazole strobilurin mix. And so that's about $14 per gallon. Now another question for the future is what are these other products like Tilt, for example? Something like Martin was saying, was it $4 per acre or so? Okay, so there are other products that we can explore to reduce this cost per acre. Okay, so Prosaro, that's almost a necessity for growing wheat in Michigan. We're talking about it's a higher end product as well at $19 per acre. And we're talking about custom applications too. This is 3 separate applications, so that's about $21. So the cost base for the profitability analysis that I had done was using $67 per acre. Yes, sir. I believe that was in the spring, though, where we spread that. But I think I misspoke when I said fall application, yeah. It is in the fall. It is the spring. Final answer. It's at greenhouse. No, Lee handles our field application. 90 pounds of N. So what we're putting down is 120 pounds of total N. So my training is as a geneticist. I do DNA sequencing and statistical genetics. But again, that's why I state we do have the tools and the skills to deliver these, to answer these kinds of questions that are very important and that are interesting from a genetic perspective as well. Because varieties differ in their response to management. So just hold that in your mind as we go through these next slides. Some varieties do respond better. Meaning that if you apply $67 per acre for management, you're going to get a different return on investment for those. Okay? These are highly significant. These are from Ingham County in 2014 and 2015. We paired these trials. With support from the Michigan Wheat Program, we were able to conduct essentially 2 trials side by side. One trial run under conventional management, fall wheat control, 90 pounds urea in the spring, wheat control in the spring as well. But no additional fungicides, no additional nitrogen, okay? That's the conventional column right here. This is Ingham County. It's not the same. They're very different environments in terms of how varieties respond. So when you're looking at the variety trial reports, determining which variety you should select, it's important to find the location that's closest to your farm. Okay, so Ingham County and Lenawee County are predictive of southern Michigan. We do have a trial here just up the road for Tuscola County. Okay, but the high management, this includes all of those applications, the additional nitrogen, the additional fungicide applications. And they do respond differently and significantly to that. So the most responsive line was the redweed DF105R. I will give a disclaimer, I'm not marketing any varieties here. This is just strictly based on our data and the analysis that I've done. So we're looking at 24 bushel response here for DF105R. So any variety on this table is responding statistically the same. So you can see a 24 bushel response and then an 18 bushel response here from this rough line. Now I will point out that Jupiter, a very high performing white wheat line, is responding 20 bushels per acre. So Jupiter, and also 9242W, which happens to be the most scab resistant line available in the state. It is a white wheat. I don't know the source of the resistance, but it is a highly resistant line, and it does respond extremely well to management, on the order of 18 bushels per acre. So we have kind of three groups. We have a very high responsive group, and then an intermediate response. So you can see Ambassador, very popular line. That's kind of an intermediate response, but that's because it's adapted to the thumb environments. You do see genotype by environment interaction. So for example, Ambassador performs, it's the second highest yielding line in Huron County, okay? Down in Lenawee County, it's number 78. There's a huge shift in terms of how these varieties perform. So again, that's why I emphasize that it's important to look at your location to see how these varieties perform, because they will perform differently. So my point is that 14 bushel increase for Ambassador might be somewhere around 20 bushels or a little bit higher in Tuscola County or in Huron County. We'll actually be able to answer that question too at the end of this year, because we do have these high management trials at multiple locations here in the thumb and then down in near East Lansing as well. So these are kind of intermediate. Now I want to point out Sunburst here. The Sunburst has nearly 100 bushel yield on its own without any fungicide, and it's an intermediate responder to fungicide. So that brings up the question is, which varieties are going to give the most return on investment? Now there's other varieties down at the end here, bottom of the list. Now we're seeing Hopewell, very widely planted, very stable, very high yielding line, but it's not one of the top responders to management. And so these responses have implications in terms of profitability. So I hope you can all see this here. This is the zero line here. This is the break-even point right here. So I've compared the profitability of these lines, at variable wheat prices. So I did this about a month ago. Wheat was maybe $4.63 back then. It's better now. So we want to probably pay attention to the $5, hopefully the $5.50 line right there. Now, on this side of the table, we can see this is a higher yielding line. Agramax 413 DF105R, and we're actually seeing at $7 wheat, we're seeing an $80 return on management for these varieties. So all the break-even line here at so 25R40 will break even at you'll just break even at 450 wheat. So what I'm saying is that there is a subset of varieties that are a more stable return on investment. Now, at the other end of the spectrum here, Aubrey does not yield a return on investment in Ingham County at this location where we tested in southern Michigan. It doesn't yield a return on investment with these applications. That's why I brought up the perspective of maybe changing out some of the components to lower cost, lower cost fungicides, etc. Because this is a very high-end package. But you can see there are some lines that give a very high return on investment and some that don't return at all, a net loss. Yes, sir?
So in other words, if you're trying to highly manage Aubrey, put an insecticide, irrigate it, on,
yeah,
you're probably losing money.
Potentially, yes. Now, I will say it would be worth doing this on your own farm if you had enough seed to do a strip, or if your neighbor was running some chemical. however it works out best, but to try a strip of it and watch the yield monitor and do these on a small scale, on a couple of fields if possible, to validate that for yourself. So I'm trying to be a little protected in these statements, and that these are the results that we get, but it's worth looking into for your own operation. Okay, so let's step back and dial in on what we're looking at here. Okay, so the baseline here, this is what I was talking about, total profitability per acre. Okay, ranging from 285 up to 415. Now this is just total yield per acre minus the cost of the inputs. And again, I'm not considering cash rent or fuel costs or any of that. I don't have the whole spreadsheet up here. And on this axis I have, so I'm just plotting total profitability by response to management. And what I'm trying to figure out is, does that high response to management actually translate into profitability? Sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't. So you see very high, this DF105R is the highest responding line. It's not necessarily the most profitable line out there, okay? Because you have to pay for those extra bushels. Now compare that to AgriMax 413. It was the second highest responder to management, but it's the most profitable line because it has the genetic yield potential on top of the management, right? What I'm saying is that there are varieties that can get further based on genetics than on management. So these lines like AgriMax 413, DF105, they're responding well to management, but they're not necessarily the most profitable. And an outstanding example of that is Sunburst. I pointed that out earlier. It's below average. Right here, these axes we have are the average. This is the average profitability, and this is the average response to management. Sunburst is below average in terms of its response to management, but it's way above average in terms of its profitability. So this would suggest that if you want to grow Sunburst, it's a very high yielding line, it may not be best to spend $67 per acre on the management. It would be more profitable to dial back the management, stick with maybe just the fusarium application. Now there are some other lines. Now Hopewell, it's not as profitable and it doesn't respond as well to management. So these are intriguing. I wouldn't say that these are conclusive. And yes sir.
The more up on the graph you go, the more response you have.
Yes.
And the more to the right you go, the more profitable it is.
Yes. So up in this axis here, we have highly profitable lines that respond well to management. Complete opposite over here. These lines don't respond well to management and they're not as profitable. So these lines over here are lines that you should consider using a less intensive management practice. Like Red Devil, it's a very high yielding line, but it doesn't have the same response to management as something like an AgriMax line or DF105R. Now this I was only able to get this. We can't wait 2 years to get information on these varieties, but we do report in a table this response to management. So I'm proposing a stepwise process in choosing varieties. The profitability is largely driven by genetics. So find the lines that are the highest yielding lines first, and then take a look at that response table every year that we put out there just to see. And then you can pencil in your own costs. If you have so the thing about this package, this management suite that we put together, it comes as one package, so we can't necessarily swap out treatments. That's something that Kurt Steinke is actually working on with an emission study. I just wanted to bring that up to see the actual impact of individual management treatments. So, any other questions? Yes, sir.
What does stripe rust do to your data?
Stripe rust will increase the response to management. Exactly. That's a very good point. So the disease pressures change every year. Last year it was a very wet year, right? So the lower canopy fungal pathogens, the septorias, the stegonosporas, the leaf spot pathogens were rampant. Okay, so they moved from the lower canopy and they took out the flag leaves at our testing locations. This year it's stripe rust. That's the pathogen and so that's actually behind it. That's behind that response to management. And that's a good point. So if you have a highly susceptible variety, that will show up in the response to management. That's a very good point. And that's something to consider also. That's another level to consider in variety selection is what is that disease resistance package? We have excellent data on stripe rust this year on 59 different varieties that are commercially available. So, and we'll actually talk about that data in a little bit. Great question. Yes, sir. Yeah. Actually, it was Jupiter is in there. Actually, Jupiter is, I believe, one of these. It would clutter up the figure if I had them all in there. Jupiter is a massive responder. So that would be in the profitable area. This would be highly profitable and has an excellent response to management. And 9242, that was the highest yielding white wheat in the state this year. And that it does respond well to management too. So 9242 and Jupiter would be in that category. Yes. Excellent question. Yes, sir. I would say that upwards of 80% of yield potential is driven by the flag leaf. You do have some photosynthetic activity from the stem and the peduncle, essentially any green tissue, and there is evidence that under high stress conditions, the awns can actually photosynthesize and give you an extra half day of grain fill. But I would say 80%, upwards of 80%. So that has to be taken into consideration, particularly in selecting varieties with disease resistance. Like I was saying, last year we have excellent leaf spot pathogen data. I mean, those can climb on susceptible varieties. They can climb all the way up the canopy to the flag leaf and take out up to 50% of the flag leaf variety. Now, stripe rust, like this year, I mean, that's something that can take out 90%. It doesn't necessarily translate into 90% loss of yield potential because there is other photosynthetic area of the plant. But it is critical, yes. Again, part of our assignment here as a breeding and genetics program is to find alternative genetics to be grown in the state of Michigan. So I'm going to shift gears a little bit now and talk about spring wheat. Has anyone here ever grown spring wheat before? Okay, good. We got about 0.25% of us have grown spring, but it's good to think about why, you know, and it's an important alternative crop, potentially an alternative crop. Okay, so and I'm sure everyone remembers the 2013, 2014 winter and the 14-15 winter. There were a lot of acres converted. I shed a tear when I saw what I thought was a beautiful wheat field being converted into corn. You know that so, and you can see that in the final acreage reports, the difference between the acres planted and the acres harvested. Okay, so there's ways to keep that acreage in place, or to provide an alternative crop, spring wheat crop, to winter wheat in the event of winter wheat failure. So we sourced 29 different. So this is another handout. If you guys have that handy, if you want to check it out, if you're curious how spring wheat does perform in the thumb of Michigan. So we looked at these. It's actually 27 different varieties, breeding lines and varieties. So this is for my colleagues Jenny Chen at the University of Idaho and Mike Pumphrey at Washington State University. We asked for their best lines to grow them out here. So it's a different environment out there. The Pacific Northwest, it's much more, it's drier, it's more arid, it's a more stressful environment. So there were some interesting things that happened when we took these varieties that were developed under high stress conditions and planted them in optimum conditions in Michigan. So the top yielding line, Idaho 1405, that's actually being released as a variety in Idaho at this time. We had 129 bushels. This was under high management. So this is that same suite of management, 120 pounds total N, an early fungicide, strobilurin, triazole mix, and a late triazole. So we can actually, now the trial average was only 86 bushels. Okay, compare that to about 100 bushels per acre average for winter wheat in Michigan. It's a little bit lower, but what I've done is I've selected the top 10 lines here. So, and Melba is actually a club wheat that's very high yielding, grown across a lot of acres in Washington. 118 bushels, okay. There were test weight issues present, you know, that was actually a symptom across the region, the whole softwheat region. But Melba has exceptionally low test weight there. So that's kind of a problem number there. And the flour yields were a little bit low. We actually ran the quality analysis on these because I bring up quality again because it's about marketability for that wheat. And they're actually they're designed for a different market. So they have excellent cookie baking properties. All right? Who's ever thought about a cookie baking property before? But they're actually designed for the noodle making market, and so they actually spread very well. So actually those noodle properties of those varieties would actually fit well for cookie making, for folks like Nabisco down the line. Lodging was a huge issue. I would say 75% of these lines lodged to very severe levels. So it's something of great concern. But we are actually breeding with these, with the Washington lines. We're actually we make the crosses, and this is spring wheat, so we can actually probably turn out a variety, potentially a spring wheat variety, within 6 years. Yes, sir.
Compare the planting time and the harvest time to oats.
Right, about same time, same exact time. And the flowering date for these were only about 2 weeks later than winter wheat, and therefore harvest was only about 2 weeks later. So we were just into the 1st of August when we harvested up here. Yes?
When you were talking about the economics of the high management, you did
Yes.
not mention anything to do with the quality of the wheat.
I didn't, yes.
And there's times when that Compressor application may make the difference whether it's even marketable.
In terms of the...
The quality.
Right. No, it is known that applying a strobilurin too soon before harvest it essentially causes the fungus to react. It reacts by producing DON. That's how the fungus makes its living, is by producing DON, and so it actually stimulates more pathogenicity in the fungus. That's why we strongly recommend triazoles for flowering, like the Prosaro Carumba type product, and to avoid any strobilurin applications that close to flowering. That can happen. And another artifact of maybe the nitrogen is the protein content go a little bit higher. Sometimes they want that. In Ontario, for the hard wheat markets, they do apply nitrogen a little bit closer to flowering, something like a Feeks 8 or 9, to actually have that nitrogen available during the grain fill period. Whereas our applications go a little bit earlier, so protein, too high of protein may not be such an issue. Although the incredibly soft wheat that we do grow around here actually has fairly low protein, so it's generally not an issue. Yeah, I would say the strobilurins are something to stay away from. Hopefully Dennis or one of our pathologists could comment maybe a little further on that as well. Well, that's all that I have prepared this morning. I'd be happy to join in the discussion about the stripe rust data that we've collected later on. And I think I'm going to turn over the floor here.
All right, let's give Eric a hand.
Thank you.